So it's got a red line through start video.
Oh, mute it.
Technical stuff, yeah, always happens. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Lovely People webinar. So we have the lovely Jeanne Catherine joining us tonight, and I know Beck knows Jeanne a little bit, but I didn't manage to have a conversation with you. So it would be really, really great if you don't mind introducing yourself, and let's see what happens from there.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeanne Catherine, or Jeanne Catherine Gray, and I am located in Charlottesville, Virginia. What would you would just want to know sort of my 3P lineage, or how do you guys like to
whatever
meet your
occurs
people?
That you think might
I grew up in New York City. We can go way back. Basically, my story is that my background was as a mental health patient for many years due to complex PTSD, a diagnosis of complex PTSD. And in July of 2011, I stumbled upon the 3 principles. My first teacher was Michael Neal, who most of you probably know. And it was actually his first weekend. In July of 2011, it was the first time he ever taught a 3 principles weekend, any kind of 3 principles training. So I was part of that first group, I'm happy to say. And I was one of those people that when I learned about the principles, and mind you, that first weekend, Michael actually never said what the 3 principles were. So we never discussed what are the 3 principles. He talked about buses a lot and bus stops. There was a lot of bus stop conversation. And so he's matured considerably as a 3 principles teacher, facilitator. But what was quite striking to me that weekend was he really pointed at the role of thought and how it was creating my experience, and particularly around the experience of fear. And so we were in this sort of one-on-one dialogue, and he asked me what fear meant, and I told him my story of abuse as a child and all the things that had happened to me. And then Michael Neal, in his most compassionate, which is a lot to say for Michael, he's not always compassionate, sometimes he's quite hard. He the most compassionate voice, he said, "I heard what you said, Jeanne, but that's not what I asked." And as soon as he said that, I had this insight that that wasn't what he asked. And I felt very confused, like, what did he ask? And he said, I asked you, what does fear mean? And as soon as he said that, I said, stop, it means stop. And then he said, what if it doesn't mean that? And he asked me that, and the same time as he asked me that, what if it doesn't mean that, I thought it, what if it doesn't mean that? And it was as if my brain went offline. And I suddenly had no idea how to organize my life or how to navigate my many issues. And for days, I didn't sleep and I didn't get any work done. And we had a follow-up call that just like on Wednesday following that training. And I said, "You've totally fucked me up, Michael. I don't even know what to do with myself. Like what have you done to me?" And I haven't slept in 3 days. And he said, what if it's not insomnia? What if you're just not sleeping? So again, he's pointing at this thought creation that was happening behind the scenes that I was unaware of. So I decided to try that for a few days. So for me, it was like, wow, maybe that's true. Let's try it on and see if it's true. So for a few days, I just didn't sleep, and I watched 100 hours of Ghost Whisperer. I don't know if you remember that TV show, but I really did watch 100 hours of Ghost Whisperer for 3 days, and then on the last day I slept, and I slept ever since. And it's not like I haven't had times where I woke up, but it's an entirely different experience when you wake up and you see thought at work in your experience. So it became very simple for me to sort of hear that busy mind and say, "Oh, you're busy right now. I'm going to go back to sleep. You handle that." I just had a different experience of insomnia, so that sleep became a regular pattern for me. So having said that, the other thing that happened during that year after my the sort of dropping in my understanding is that people around me started to say, what's different about you, especially my husband. And he was quite annoyed because we did 3 hours of therapy a night together as a regular practice in our marriage. And so he was quite annoyed, like, what is going on and how come you're not taking therapy seriously? And I felt really bad for him, had a lot of compassion for him. And I said, I'm happy to do those things if you want. At which point he became really furious because I seriously wasn't taking it seriously enough. If I was just going to do the rote, give me the things to say, would not be right. And so during that year, eventually, I went on to Super Coach Academy and did my training there. And then I did the Advanced Academy. And then my husband and I did an intensive with George Pransky and Linda Pransky. And about a year later, did an intensive with Keith and Valda. If you don't know them, Keith Blevins and Valda Monroe. And then he went on and did Super Coach Academy, and I went on and did One Thought. And $70,000 later, I am now a proud owner of my own 3 Principles Understanding, and ran my own business for 7 years before I was hired full-time to do research in the principles, in the field of the principles. So now most of my time is made up writing, research design, interviewing, and occasionally delivering the principles. My consultancy where they hired me, we focus on delivering the principles to first responders. So I still get this opportunity to deliver. I was just working with the fire chief last week, and we'll be working with a group with Joe Bailey in April to deliver to the fire department through principles. But for the most part, most of my time is made up with research. And so that's a little information about me and my background.
That is brilliant. Thank you. So when you deliver the principles, I know, we've only got an hour and we're just having a quick chat here, but what little gems can you share with us that you would think would be most helpful to people? If anyone here listening to this is quite new to what you're saying and they're a little bit like, what happened to you and how did that happen, or any, or someone who's been around it a little while, what would be a few things that you might be able to share with us that you think people might find helpful?
Well, I mean, of course, those are 2 very different groups. So you have the group of people who are just new to the principles. They don't, know exactly what this is. They're sort of feeling it out. Usually they're interested in the human factor, but they're not convinced this will be the thing that helps them, but maybe they see somebody change, right? In that case, the invitation really is to swim in it a little longer, to not hold your curiosity back in terms of like watch things, listen to things, talk to people. But where the biggest change happens, if you're really interested in seeing some kind of personal behavioral change, really happens when you have a tipping point in your understanding. So if you, one of the things to think about is just that your brain is designed in such a way that you have habitual thinking that's personal to you, that you always do. And it takes a while before you to sort of check out of that habitual thinking and let something new arise. So I always encourage people who are new and newer to the principles to really remember that about habitual thinking, that you need to give yourself an opportunity, maybe 3 or 4 days, maybe at a conference, maybe with a mentor, where you check out of habitual thinking and allow new thinking to arise. And when you do that, it's worthwhile, because when you have new thinking arise, then your behavior changes. So much like if you think about my 5-year-old, when she came home one day and I had been pushing her to wash her hands, and it was constant effort. And she came home one day and she said, "Mommy, don't kiss me." And I was like, "Why, honey? Why can't I kiss you?" And she said, "Germs." And I knew right at that moment, oh, we're going to be just fine. She's going to wash her hands from now on. This is not going to be an issue. That's the thing about new thinking, is it changes your understanding, which then changes your behavior. And so the invitation. Is
that us or?
don't know.
No, everybody seems to be moving on our screen. I think we might have lost Jean.
Can everyone still hear us?
Nod if you can hear us. Nobody's nodding.
Oh, Chris just nodded. I think Chris can hear her.
Looks like Jean Catherine cut out, and maybe she's coming back on.
Yeah, I think it's
She
Jean.
froze up. Yeah.
It's not always easy to tell straight away if it's us or someone else. So we'll give her a minute and see if she reappears.
Oh, she's gone.
No, she's gone.
That's usually a good sign, because
that means she'll probably pop back up in a minute, hopefully. Fingers crossed. She'll be muted when she reappears, though.
Yeah, she might be.
So let's fill the gap. Deb, go.
Well, I was just thinking, remember when we went to that conference, that meeting thing a few days ago, a few weeks ago, and we had to all put our favourite song on a piece of paper.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do that game. Oh, she's back.
Oh.
Damn it. We're not going to get to play that fun game. Hang on.
Sorry about that, everybody. I seem to have been kicked off the World Wide Web.
It happens to the best people.
Not so well.
I was talking and you were all like,
yeah.
a long time.
Yeah, you suddenly froze and we were like,
oh, is it us?
We think we've lost her.
We didn't know whether it was us that dropped off or you, but
I guess it was me.
So
I was just saying that my 5-year-old discovered this thing called germs, and then suddenly she's washing her hands and I don't have to push her. And that's the nature of this understanding. If you allow yourself a few days out of your habitual thinking, something will arise which is different than what you usually do. And your understanding will shift your behavior. And so that's why I would say if you're new to the conversation, newer, or if you feel like I've been in the conversation a while, nothing's happening, then I would encourage you to just get some mentoring. What'd you say?
I said, where's my insight?
Yes. This obsession with insight does go a little too far, in my opinion. But I think what we're really looking for is not insight, but to cultivate a feeling of reflection that's sort of always available to us. So if you have more experience and you feel like, wow, the principles have been useful and helpful, and I want to share them with other people, or I feel passionate about it, then you want to cultivate more time, not seeking an insight, but allowing reflection and that feeling or quality of reflection to be a part of your way of navigating the world. Because you're going to bring that then to your conversations, you're going to bring it to your writing, you're going to bring it to your YouTube videos, right? Whatever it is that's important to you, you're going to say, oh, reflection and that feeling of reflection, that feeling of curiosity and openness and looking at fresh thought and what arises, that all is going to guide you in these conversations, and you don't have to manage it. You don't have to figure it out. And so you can kind of lean in on your understanding for support to do whatever it is that you're doing. I mean, it may not be facilitating a 3 principles understanding. You might be a school teacher, but your understanding will change how you teach. And your understanding will help you, if you lean into it, reach more students, be more effective, see better outcomes, if that makes sense.
Will you share a little bit about, how is it that it will help you share, have better outcomes, and you said you were working with a fire chief, why is it that it makes sense to you to share this understanding with people like that? What do you think this changes for people?
Well, I think fundamentally what it changes for people is that they drop what's on their mind. So they have more time that they are open and relaxed. And when you're open and relaxed, the natural outcome, even just in your brain chemistry, let's forget that we're spiritual beings for a minute and just look at the biology of it, right? Just in your brain chemistry, if you spend more time open and relaxed, then you have really literally like you're awash in endorphins. Your frontal lobe is online, right? You just have the ability to respond, which is different than living in a sort of more animalistic, reactionary, which is sort of where when I learned about mental health, which is sort of a joke because, of course, there is no mental health in the field of psychology, as far as I can tell. But when I learned about mental health as a patient of a mental health care provider, I really didn't learn any skills for cultivating mental health. I learned skills for managing illness. I learned skills for maybe making really long lists and calling people and, sort of managing each of my symptoms. And ultimately that was cultivating my symptoms, which I was unaware of at the time. I didn't understand that. I thought that the things I was doing were the things to do if I felt anxious or suicidal or self-deprecating in some way, or, having a panic attack. Or I thought the managerial tools I was given was the appropriate response to these sort of extreme experiences and scary experiences. And it never occurred to me that my mental health providers didn't understand the skill of mental health, and that they didn't teach me how to look for and cultivate mental health in my day-to-day living. And so this is really the opportunity. And in many ways, as a 3 Principles practitioner, I'm interested in the impact that this understanding has on mental health because of my background. And what I've seen is that human beings have a lot of unhealthy thinking. And if they take that unhealthy thinking seriously, they can really fuel the fire and create a lot of drama and a lot of obsession and a lot of worry. And so people like the fire chief, when they get an inkling to where their mental health is actually coming from, they have already quite a bit at their fingertips, and they're interfacing with so many people, who could benefit from dropping what's on their mind, right? And they now they're cultivating an ability to respond. They're cultivating a day-to-day mental health, which they weren't aware they could cultivate before in the same way. So the first responders particularly appeal to me because they work in our communities and because of the kind of work they do. I think if they show up with a real clear state of mind, let's say, or they show up really understanding where the experience is coming from. Let's say a police officer showed up at a crime scene, understanding where the people at the crime scene, their upset was actually generated. I think that makes them more available, in fact, and more potential for community building and for relationship building and for better outcomes in the long run. So those are things that really I feel passionate about, and why the first responders appeal to me as a group.
Yeah. So if somebody was listening to this, and you've said a few times, if we knew where our experience was really coming from, would you share a little bit about where you see experience comes from, and how seeing that, maybe where you used to think your experience comes from, where you see it now, and how that makes a difference?
Well, I'll give you a very specific example. I was, when I had insomnia before I understood the principles, one of the ways that I handled going to bed at night was I would have a ritual of things to do in order to keep myself safe. I would close all the curtains in the house. I would lock the doors. I would make sure that the dog, who's 100 pounds and very frightening to a stranger, I'd make sure the dog was in my bedroom with me. I would lock my bedroom door. And then if my husband was not available, like let's say he was traveling, I would call him, and he would be on the phone while I went to bed, so that I was not alone, right? With the dog and the locked doors and the drawn curtains. Now, if you can imagine the amount of time and energy and effort that took to do all of those activities in order to feel safe, right? That's what I was going for. I want to feel safe so I can sleep. So sometimes that was helpful, sometimes that worked, and sometimes it didn't. Fundamentally, though, the misunderstanding was that feeling safe came from the shades being drawn, my husband being on the phone, the dog being in my room. I didn't realize that feeling safe is a feeling, that I have internally. It's not something that is put into me. It's something that occurs over here. And when I realized that feeling safe came from inside of me, I really, really saw myself one night closing the curtains, doing all these very busy things to make myself feel safe. It dawned on me, oh, I can't feel safe doing this, because the feeling of safety doesn't come from these activities. The feeling of safety comes from within. Hang on a second. My husband's standing here. Do you need something? Well, you can come and listen. You don't have to stand outside. He wants to be in on the conversation.
Yes,
Everybody, hello. Here's my husband, John Gray. Say hello.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
This is the anyway, so feel free to chime in. So basically, though, you were asking me about this inside out versus outside in. So one of the things that happens during the 3 or 4 days that you spend with a mentor is you begin to recognize that these experiences you're having, no matter what they are, insomnia, panic attacks, stress, right, anxiety, you name it, your experience is generated from within. Naturally, innocently, that's the nature of your humanity, right? That's how it's designed. So it's not personal, it's not your fault, it's just the nature of it. When you begin to shift that understanding and you begin to recognize your upset, your happiness, your love, all those things are coming from inside of you, then you stop looking outside to try to justify, change, make better. Right? So when I had insomnia, I no longer had to close the shades to try to make insomnia better. Does that make sense? So generally, one of the phenomenal things about that is that means you spend a lot less time, literally time, out there doing things that are pointless. And I think that's one of the things that struck me the most when I talk with people either in research or even clients who I've worked with, practitioners I've trained. One of the things that really struck me was how much more time they felt like they had available in their schedule, simply because they weren't trying to solve their emotional experience by doing something out there. And so it's a very important shift in understanding that there really needs to happen to cultivate the benefits of, your well-being.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. So we've had a couple of people say that they're interested to hear more about the research that you're doing. Where's that taking you and what are you?
Yay. Thank you for asking. Research is like, I thought I was a great 3 principles practitioner, but when I discovered research, I was like, no, I really wasn't. I love research. And what I love about it is it's really an art. It's one of the things I think that people don't understand about research. We tend to think of research like, especially in psychology, we tend to think of Skinner sort of testing rats and babies and like torturing people and observing it. And in actuality, research is what we're doing every day if we're human, right? Because we are curious about the world, because we want to know how things work. So if you were ever that little kid who like took apart the car to see what the car did and then couldn't figure out how to put it back together, it's like, that's research. Or if you are a mom who tried 100 different ways to put your child to bed on time, it's like, that's research. And what's really phenomenal about the research potential now is that over the last 30 years, there's been this development of qualitative research methods. And so what that means is the ability to get descriptions about people's experiences and look at those descriptions. Let's say you get 100 descriptions about what it feels like to have an insight, which is something I'm particularly interested in. You could look at those descriptions and find a common structure. Even if their descriptions are different, they might all refer to something that actually is spiritual, right? Or they might, who knows? I haven't done all that research yet, but that's the kind of thing that you can do in a qualitative research project. You can get the descriptions and you can look at structures and see what kind of impact, let's say, understanding the inside-out nature of your experience has on your day-to-day living, your relationships. You can look at those things. So the research projects that we're doing at Three Principles Research and Consulting are, the first project we got approval for was actually a mixed method project where we will ask questions in a questionnaire and then interview at the end homeless people who are receiving the Three Principles intervention. So I'm in charge of a couple different things in terms of research. I'm in charge of applying to human ethics, which you have to do if you want to do any person-to-person research, any human being research. I'm in charge of coordinating the researchers because I don't do all the research myself. So we have a statistician, we have a supervisor who is always telling me what to do, which is great. And but he's just a very experienced researcher. And then we have Three Principles practitioners who are facilitating the programs. They need to understand why we're asking the questions we're asking. They need to help us determine what questions to ask. So I'm in charge of facilitating that. The second project that I've been in charge of is a project it's happening at Nottingham Prison in England, where Jacqueline Hollow's Beyond Recovery group is going to be in there delivering to 120 men. I think we're going to do 60 as a control group and 60 in intervention. So 60 of them will receive the Three Principles and 60 of them won't. They're on the same wing, and then I will go in and we've already designed the questionnaires. I've already submitted to human ethics. So hopefully by the end of the month, we'll actually start that research project. I will go in and interview theoretically 120 male prisoners at the Nottingham prison, which would be about 120 hours of work. So I was really looking forward to that. But it probably won't be that many because there'll be some dropout, and that happens naturally in research, and especially in a prison environment. So that's the second project we're working on. The third project we're working on is actually the fire department here in Charlottesville. We're going to have a small group of 20 who receive the intervention. And in that case, I won't be able to do interviews because I'm delivering the program, which would be bias the research. So in that case, I'll be designing the questionnaires and somebody else will deliver the questionnaires probably electronically to them before, after, and then follow up. And hopefully we can do a 6-month follow-up on that one. And then there's one more project we're working on, which is to put together, I'm trying to organize all the researchers in the Three Principles community who are interested in asking questions at the Three Principles conference in June. And so I'm interfacing with Anthony Kessel and the conference coordinators to see if we can have live research on the ground at the conference. So look for me there. I hope to be there doing that.
Yeah.
It would be really cool. And, not everybody is warm to research. So a lot of my job is building relationships with people who maybe don't see the benefits of having research in the Three Principles community. And then, of course, a lot of my job is to coordinate researchers and their different desires. And we also fund research. So we're funding a project in Portland, Oregon. We pay researchers to study Three Principles intervention happening there in women's and men's prisons with a woman named Anna Debenham. She's the Three Principles facilitator there. So we also fund research. We're looking at new research projects to fund at the end of the year. And we do our best to look for independent researchers who are not Three Principles. So we don't necessarily fund there are some Three Principles people who do research. We don't necessarily fund them. We do, but we do fund researchers to study Three Principles programs. So that's a little bit about the research.
Wow. So when will that, so someone says, can you repeat the name of the organization, and do you have any published papers open to the public and read?
Yeah, so you can find Three Principles Research and Consulting under 3PRC, 3prc.com. We have essentially 2 landing pages. One is for first responders and one is for research and people interested in conducting research. I have a lot of conversations with Three Principles practitioners who are interested in researching their programs. So I'm available for that. Feel free to reach out to me and we would just make an appointment and I'll explain to you how it works. But mostly I'm explaining how research works because most of the time people don't know. So that's one of the things I do. And then in terms of published papers, we don't have any published papers yet out of 3PRC. There are 3 published papers that Tom Kelly has put out that are empirical. There's one unpublished paper by Santa Clara County that was about addiction that is, I think, the best written paper ever written about a Three Principles program. And then there's a big I a year-long project that's been published as a just as the Cypress initiative. It's with students, and they had very good outcomes with 15 and over. But you could write them directly. The Cypress initiative is more like a report. I just so you know, we can hear you if you're talking to somebody in the background.
I think we've just muted.
So and then and feel free to email me if you just want me to refer you to any of these articles. You know, there is not a lot of empirical research. That's why we started this program. We wanted there to be more empirical research. There are quite a few opinion pieces, so you can find like 30 principles in published peer-reviewed journals, but that really doesn't hold water for most researchers. They don't want to see that. They want to see actual numbers. So you can expect to start seeing some published work at the sort of in a year, basically in a year and a half. You can start seeing something. And of course, it takes time. Once we get everything written up, then it takes time for a peer-reviewed journal to evaluate it and then publish it. So, you know, we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, no, but it's really it's really good to see the research being done as well. You know, it's absolutely brilliant, and I think that will be incredibly helpful, because I know there's an awful lot of people you know, learn about the iHeart program, for example, you know, to take that into schools. And I think if we've got this, something that's supporting what we're saying, you know, what three principles practitioners are saying, I think if we've got the research that actually supports it, I think that's really brilliant. We went into a school and we had some amazing results with the girls, didn't we? Yeah. But yeah, even then, even when the teachers can see it, they're still sort of like, yeah, we don't quite know what happened, why the girls, you know, have responded so well. And it's kind of like, yeah. Might have been something to do with what we were sharing with them, who knows. So,
well, and I wanted to share that Ann Curtis wrote that the research projects are listed in 3P Resources Library.
Thanks,
so that is some place you can go. It's just like a hodgepodge of everything, but feel free to take a look and see what you find there. That's a good resource.
Yeah, Anne's resource is brilliant for all sorts of things. It's absolutely great. She has some amazing things in there. So yeah, thank you, Anne. So has anyone else got any questions or anything you would like to ask the lovely Jeanne Catherine? So we have had, yeah, events.
Anne, are you putting your finger up? Are you?
I just was really interested to hear about the research, because especially having trained as a doctor and so on, I have been very anti-research, because most of the medical research that I've been, you know, that I've read and that I've seen is pretty much a waste of time, because it doesn't ever take into account human beings and thought. You know, it's like it's always so, which is crazy, because that's the biggest thing that's working. So I'm really pleased that you're now being able to use qualitative research instead of it has to be, you know, the quantitative stuff. I'm really pleased. That's really great. Thanks very much for letting us know.
Absolutely. I'll give you a great example. That Santa Clara County paper, they did interviews with their participants, and I think they had like a group of 80, so it's quite a big group. And in their interviews, they found this out. They didn't find it out in their surveys, right? Their questionnaires didn't reveal this. In the interviews, they discovered that the people who had received the three principles intervention, almost down to all of them, had done something like get a job, go back to school, apply to go back to school, change their living situation, right? They had done these things. When they interviewed the group who had not received the intervention, and they had received another intervention, but not the three principles, 201, that group was not going back to school. They were not getting jobs, right? So that's something that it's a description of what's happening that you don't always see in the survey questionnaire, right, about experience. that is significantly different. I mean, that's a significant difference. And it's one of the papers that actually inspired me to interview both the control group and the intervention group at Nottingham, because I realized if we don't talk to the control group, we won't know what the differences are. The intervention group can say all kinds of great stuff, but if we don't talk to the control group, we can't say it's different than what everybody else is experiencing. So that's what Anne is speaking to, is that kind of detail. And there's been a real movement in the research community. So a lot of our sort of old timer 3 principles practitioners, they got their PhDs 30, 35 years ago, 40 years ago, and they didn't have a qualitative method that was recognized and used. And so they see research as being what you're describing, sort of this pointless, this list of questions, you don't necessarily see change, so you miss it, right? And what we're finding is that these two things together create quite a clear picture of change occurring. And in fact, our statistician, who's not a 3 principles practitioner at all, he's really thrilled with the quantitative data as well. So he's very happy about the changes he's seeing. Especially in things like relationships or, quality of relationships. That's something that surprised us, and we were like, oh yeah, we should ask about that because it does seem to impact people's relationships. Anyway, so thanks, Anne.
It is surprising when you come across the principles and across the board the different things that it affects, that, like you say, if you don't ask those questions, you don't know. And I know I've heard Michael Neal say before, when he's had people go on his trainings and afterwards they say, oh, how did you stop me biting my nails? How did you improve my relationship? I came to you because I wanted something to happen with my job or something like this. So it's kind of like
I had a guy come to me once because he wanted to leave his job. So we did the training, and then within a few months, he had applied to work full-time at his position. They gave him a bigger position, more responsibility within the place he wanted to leave. And I asked him, like, what happened? I thought you wanted to leave. And he said, well, I was blaming my job for my unhappiness. And I realized it wasn't true. And I love my job. He loves it, loves what he does. He's a professor of theater at a community college. And so that's the kind of, it's a subtle shift, but it's a big shift, right? It changed the whole course of his life. And that's the kind of thing we would see in a 3 principles training. Sure.
What we got here?
Evan just asked, you'd said the Santa Clara County research isn't actually published, but is there somewhere we can read it?
Well, I can send it to you. And it's probably on 3P Resources Library. 3 Principles Movies does have some stuff, but not a lot. And some of it's even out of date, like you can't click on it anymore. So I would use the 3P Resources Library over the 3principlesmovies.com. And then Santa Clara County should be at 3P Resources Library. If it's not, feel free to email me. I'll send it to you. It's a sweet article. I wish we had more like it, frankly, and I wish it was published. I don't know why it never got published.
So if any of the 3 principles practitioners watched this webinar and came across, is there anything that they can do to kind of help with the research, get involved in it in any way, or what can we kind of do to support you, help you? Is there anything practical or?
Well, I mean, the number one thing you can do is do research. I mean, that's the number one thing. Even poor quality research is better than no research, frankly. Having said that, a lot of people, when they don't know about research, they will contact me and say, can you give me a questionnaire to fill out, have my people fill out. That is not quite as simple as it sounds, because each population is different, and each population has different their principles impact them differently. You as a practitioner are going to want to know about something in particular. Maybe you work with women leaders, right? Or maybe you work with, an insurance company, and you want to know about effectiveness of their productivity, right? Those are going to be different questions. What we are developing right now that everybody could use is we're working on the 3 principles inventory. It was originally designed by Kelly and Pransky, and we evaluated that inventory that they created and discovered it was not valid, which means we can't use it with just any population. And we really want to design a 3 principles inventory that anyone could use with any population, that would show us that it's the three principles of understanding that is correlating to these changes. So as your understanding changes, so does your mental health, so does your productivity, so does your effectivity, whatever it is. So, definitely reach out to us for that. We'd be happy to share that with you. We're still in process with that. It's not a finished product by any means. And we are collaborating with other 3P people like Tom Kelly and Jack Pransky. We're doing our best to work as teams and to give each other feedback and support. Then the other thing I would say about conducting research is that if you want to publish in a peer-reviewed journal, there are certain standards you have to meet, like a human ethics board and things like that. So I can certainly advise you on that. But even if you're just starting off with, I want to know if my program's working and I'm going to publish a blog about it, that's great. Like, start somewhere, ask some questions before and after. That's what I would say. Start somewhere. Do something. Ask questions. And then write about them.
Yeah, because it's surprising how often you don't, we're running a program at the moment with some lovely ladies, and literally the difference in their face when they walk in the room, they look like, this one particular lady, she's kind of said, people keep coming up to me and saying, what's happened to you? You look younger, you look different. And so I suppose even those kinds of things, if we had, she's clearly seen a huge difference in herself. But obviously we didn't ask those questions first. So maybe it's actually good to know that those kind of things are helpful.
Yeah, and if you ask the questions first before the training, then you have something to compare it to. So if you ask the same questions at the beginning, the same questions at the end, then you'll see, they answer these questions differently, and you can compare that. Of course, you can still ask questions at the end, The advantage to you in terms of marketing is huge, because you can articulate better if you ask questions of your participants what could happen during a training to someone. And so you can say, let's say we had 10 people in our training, and one of them looked 10 years younger, right? 5 of them changed the dynamics with their kids and said that this was really beneficial to that relationship. The other 4 of them, they said that, they liked the training, but they didn't really get it or whatever, so you have a sense of the trajectory of what you're working with. And if you do that at every training, you get a really clear description. It does help you enroll people. So even if you're not thinking you want to do research for research purposes, just doing research to help you describe to potential participants potential pathways and benefits and outcomes that you've seen, it can be beneficial to that.
Yeah. And definitely, I think, it hadn't occurred to me before, but having this talk with you this evening, as I said, we went into the school and we had some great results with the girls that we work with in the school, but we didn't ask any questions at the beginning. And the teacher that kind of set it up for us, she was incredibly busy. She was too busy to deal with us and too busy to see what we were doing and too busy. And, she's aware that the girls are very different, but she was when she had the conversation with this at the end, she just said, they just don't ever come into my office anymore with all these problems, but I don't really know why. So actually kind of looking at that, it would have been incredibly helpful if we'd have asked the girls these questions at the beginning and then at the end, and then been able to kind of say to her, look, this is what the girls feel they got from this. This is the changes that they've seen themselves. So actually, that's been really helpful to me to kind of hear you say it in that way, because it just new thought there, it just hadn't occurred to me.
And you have to start somewhere, so that's great that it's occurring to you now. And the other thing you can do is you can find a local dissertation student who's interested in mental health, or they're interested in education, right? They don't even have to be interested in the principles. And you could ask them to design, they're always looking for a good project, right, that they could do for their dissertation. They can design a research project for you and conduct it around your program.
Good idea.
Like this.
So never feel like you're alone. I mean, you just have to, I think Jacqueline and I were talking about this when I was in England a few weeks ago. So often people will come up to us because we're both action doers. We both get things done. We both built our own businesses, and And we have a lot of people come to us who say, well, I'd like to do what you're doing. How do I do it? You know, like, it seems hard. And we were talking about, like, well, in actuality, it's like the only thing to do is the next thing to do. Like, that's all you can ever do. And so, you know, that's true for research as well as it is for building a 3 principles program of some kind or business of some kind.
Thank you. Oh, so we've got, what have we got? Here's the page for the research articles in the library. So yeah, Anna's very kindly put the link there. She hasn't spotted the Santa Clara paper yet. Do you know what the name of it is?
Why don't we do that offline? I'll just give you my, and I'll give it to you, probably is the best thing. I'll put my email here. And if you don't mind emailing me, I will send it right back to you. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, because if there's a link to something like that, or we can put it when this webinar goes onto YouTube, we could pop it under the webinar so that people can find that as well if they want to. So that's great. Lovely. Thank you. So has anyone else got any questions or anything that they would like to ask? Anything they would like to, and you know, anything that's occurred to anyone that they would like to share or ask?
So remember, I've introduced the principles to businesses, to fire department, to UVA professors. So if you are one of those people who's like, I just don't know how to do it, this is your chance to ask about that. I know that's often a question.
Okay, well, would you like to share, if nobody has got a question, and please, you know, stick your hand up, unmute yourself if you want to kind of interrupt, but would you like to share?
Oh,
Chris is lovely, Chris. Good. Go for it, Chris.
Hey.
Lovely, Chris.
Yeah, this just kind of popped out of my head, and I've heard some recorded stuff that you've done, Jeanne Catherine, kind of around this question, but I figured kind of as of February 2019. So I have 2 daughters, and one of the things I think about a lot, and I think this might be a great question for you, is, you know, kind of sharing with them. And I was going to say kind of integrating, because, you know, I don't think it's so much of a kind of like a teaching type sharing, or from the opportunities that kind of you know, occur to me, or little things like that. It's typically been finding a way to kind of weave it into something, you know, just day to day, but just kind of like yeah, sharing it with kids. And one is 3, the other one is 7 right now.
Nice. Well, yay for daughters. I love my girls, so I'm very biased. I have to say that, I mean, it sounds like you're already doing, of course, the right thing, which is just sort of, you know, it's part of the fabric of your life. Sid Banks was huge on saying, like, take care of your own understanding. Don't worry about your kids. I've heard from kids who are kids of the first generation who said, like, that did not work. And I thought that was really interesting. I do think that there is an active role that we can play, and that active role has to be really us consciously looking at what we're communicating to our kids. So, for example, my younger daughter, who has a lot of learning needs and disability, will come home from school. She's had a difficult day. She's Black, and the child put soil on their face and said, "Now I look like you." Right? Now, my response to that is modeling my understanding or not. Right? So if I become very angry or livid that the child did this, right, I'm not really modeling that I understand where my experience is coming from, or that I understand where her experience is coming from. You know, so it requires a conversation with her in a quiet, settled down kind of way about how do you think that child was feeling at that moment? Where do you think that was coming from? Do you think it has anything to do with being Black or not, right? Because, of course, it probably has everything to do with where this kid is at in the moment, not where she's at. So we talked about how that kid was wanting her attention, how that kid was trying to make a joke. And so it was this, what's called in the field of racism, a microaggression, but it's coming from this kid's insecure place, insecure thinking. And so my ability to talk to them about that in a settled down way, especially as they become older, is important for them to understand where experience is coming from and not believe that what our society is teaching our kids all the time, which is that, literally you are responsible for putting feelings into somebody else and you should apologize for that. I really find myself having to kind of combat that thinking regularly. And encourage my kids to take responsibility for their experience and to recognize where other people's experience is coming from, which is from their own insecurity or their sense of confidence, right, wherever they are in that spectrum. So I would say that's a real deal thing. And for my teenage daughter, there's a lot more mature conversations late at night for like 20 minutes. And she's become really, she talks about becoming a psychologist, which rocks my world because I didn't think that would ever happen with her. But she is definitely become sort of the advisor to her friends. She's the person they call. And I don't know that she is teaching them anything about the 3 principles, which is what I hope she's teaching them. But she's definitely settled down when she talks to them and she uses her understanding, to interact with them. So it's very interesting. And then, of course, the last thing I'll say about kids is that we don't have as much control as we'd like. I really genuinely think that that's a misunderstanding on our part as parents, where we imagine we get to decide what they understand or what they think, how they behave, right? So much of it is really recognizing that their experience comes from them and we can't control or stop that from happening. We certainly can understand what that's like. Easier said than done, right, Chris?
Yeah. There's a lot of things there that I could relate to, or just resonate with. Because when I let myself, it's easy to be concerned about like school, since they're going to school, at least right now, and that like you were saying, kind of the messages that they get. But on the flip side, like I was just thinking, like one of the things that really stood out to me and was kind of like a teaching moment, almost like an insight, I guess, just because it was it just happened very naturally, but early on in my own kind of coming across the principles was when my older one was a little younger. She would throw these tantrums that where it would eventually get to a point where we're just like, she needs to be in her room, and I'd have to like physically carry her up to her room. But and so what happened naturally, I guess is what I want to say, is I wanted to be with her, and logistically I had to, wasn't like I had to keep the door shut. There wasn't like a lock or a system, and so what I found myself doing was I would go in with her and I would, sit in front of the door, and she would actually get physical, like she would hit me and stuff like that. But what kind of blew my mind, especially the first time it happened, was just like this awareness of how like peaceful things were in my own mind, and all I kind of felt was love. And, and I just sat there, protected myself to a degree. Um, but basically I was just like, I want to be there to show her love and caring, but at the same time, I'm not going to try and put my hands in the wheel, so to speak. Like, just let her be however she wants to be, not try and like direct her. Just quiet, just sit, quietly. And then inevitably after a certain amount of time, and the time shrunk. I think the longest it ever was an hour, but then it drastically reduced. And I could really tell all of a sudden she would just kind of click and be like, oh, let's go do blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, because I could just tell that she was kind of back in. She wasn't all caught up, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I think one of the things you're speaking to that's really important is our state of mind as parents. And one of the things that I've seen be very beneficial to my kids is when things started getting crazy, I started to ask myself, where have I been? What's happening with my state of mind? Am I feeling the way you're describing, like love and peace and presence? Or am I checked out? Am I, doing something else in my head and not really with my kids, or feeling angry or whatever it is, insecure? And it did help me to consciously cultivate well-being when I was with my kids. And so that meant, not doing other things when I was with them, just doing one thing with them, like we're doing this activity together. Or that meant when I felt angry, really asking myself, where is this anger coming from? Could my 8-year-old really put this anger, this rage into me, or is this coming from me? And it did allow me to build what you're talking about, this positive kind of rapport that the kids can bounce back quickly from their emotional up and downs and insecurities and fear and whatever's happening with them. And they gravitate toward this well-being that I've been cultivating in my relationship with them. Right. To the point where my younger daughter, who is probably the most challenging to parent for a lot of people, she and I have a rapport where I could just look at her, and say, for real? Like you're going that way? And she'll be like, ha ha ha, like, no, I'm not going to do it, So I do encourage parents to, you can't, it's not your fault, but they are your kids. So do as Chris is modeling and really look for your well-being in that relationship, because you're setting the tone innocently in that rapport, if that makes sense to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. What a great story. I do think one of the things about getting parents together is that they share, like, from a non-parent point of view, sometimes horrific stories, I remember this parent who used to pinch her daughter when she got so mad, she would pinch her daughter. And I was thinking, like, these are the kinds of things parents don't talk about. Like, they don't tell each other these nasty things that they did to their kids because it's child abuse, right? And yet parents are struggling so much with their state of mind and their insecurity as parents that they often find themselves doing these unspeakable things. And so this ability to get together and talk about it and be real about how we get up against ourselves as parents and how we feel like failures as parents, and, and ways we find to navigate these little growing people who are changing all the time and don't have freaking your owner's manual, right? Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I found it incredibly helpful to realize that my children had wisdom and okayness and this inside of them, because I think as a parent, for me, I'd kind of we feel, and it's very easy to take on stuff, you know, when our kids do act out, when they do things that they shouldn't, and this kind of stuff. It's very easy to kind of think, oh, I need to fix this. This is down to me, and take it all on. And yet it was incredibly helpful for me to see my kids have their own wisdom, and I can trust that, and pointing that out to them and guiding them towards that. That was incredibly helpful. Oh, I'm aware of the time. Where did that go? We have such fun on these webinars and then it's gone. It's been really great speaking to you tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to see, you know, I did a podcast for 4 years and haven't been doing it now that I've been working in research. And I'm thrilled to see that there are other people creating opportunities for people to ask these kinds of questions and to support each other, you know, both virtually and in person. You know, if you guys have a book club or whatever, people do it. Like, don't be afraid to share with your friends, to create social groups around this conversation. Just want to encourage everybody on the call that's really the way to share and to support your own well-being. So don't be afraid to keep going, and thank you for the call.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Yes. So Yvonne says, thank you so much for this talk. Very inspiring, and absolutely second that. Yeah, it was a great chat. And I just love where these webinars go, because no two are exactly the same. And you know, nowhere we go anywhere with it. It's really great. And it's been lovely to have a bit of interaction and chatting tonight. That's absolutely fabulous. So who have we? Yeah, go on.
I knew you were going to ask who's next week, and the answer to that is we haven't confirmed a speaker for next week yet.
Oh well.
So join us next week for a surprise.
Surprise.
Who knows what lovely person might turn up next week?
It'll be fun. It'll be inspiring. Yeah. So just join us. That'll be exciting for all of us. So it was great to have everybody here tonight. So thank you very much, and it was really lovely to get to know you, Jean. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Jean Catherine. Lovely.
Thank you all.
Great questions, great sharing.
Bye,
thank you very
everyone.
much. Bye.